Hey there, it's Sam. This lesson will learn how to convert this into this. And the magic behind it is something called CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheet. Let's dive into the code straight away. Let's use our HTML code from the last episode and add the style tags inside head to start writing CSS code. You can put the style tag inside the body as well, but it's recommended that you put it inside the head tag. Now to apply CSS styles, we first need to target the elements that we want to style. To do that, we'll use something called the CSS Selector. I've created a small cheat sheet here, so just refer to it as we learn how to write our first CSS code. Alright, I'm not too happy with the font of our website currently, so let's try to change that. We want to change the font for the whole document body, so we need to target the body element. To do that, we can use cheat code number 1. Type in the body tag directly and put in curly braces, and we'll change the font family to Cambria and hit tab to autocomplete. And now if you look at our browser, the font has all changed. That's a reason on why CSS is called Cascading Style Sheet. It is because the style we define on a parent element will be cascaded throughout all its children. In this case, we apply a style to the body tag, and the style will be cascaded throughout all the children it has. In other words, all the content inside the body tag. The next thing we want to do is to change the navbar or navigation bar into something prettier. Right now, I wouldn't even consider our navigation component as a bar, unfortunately. So let's try to fix that. The first thing we want to do is to make the list item to be aligned on one single horizontal line. Let's target it. The list items are children of unordered list, and unordered list is a child of the nav component. We will use cheat code number 3 in our cheat sheet to target the list items. So we'll target nav and its direct children ul and again li. And put curly braces, and to make them to show it in one horizontal line, we'll need to set the display to inline. And now it looks more like a proper navbar. At this point, you might be wondering, what the heck, Sam? How would I know about all this font family and display CSS property? Anywhere I can find a reference to them? My answer to that is I've included a link in the description where you can find an exhaustive list of CSS property that you can use to style your HTML elements. Just a warning though, the list is very huge and you don't need to learn them all at once. We'll try to cover the most commonly used properties in our lessons. Anyway, let's continue to style our navigation bar. If you take a close look on the left-hand side of the navbar, you'll see some unintentional white space there. That's the default behavior of an unordered list. How can we override this behavior? Well, let's take a moment to review how spacing works around elements. If we right-click on an element and hit Inspect, it'll bring up the Developers tool. Most modern browsers should have these out of the box. I'm using the Brave browser, and it is a more secure variant of the Chrome browser. If you haven't heard of the Brave browser before, you can use my referral link in the description below to check it out. Anyway, don't be scared by the Developers tool. There's a lot of things here, but you do not need to learn them all at once. We'll be learning bits and pieces as we go along with our course. Right now, we want to investigate the unordered list component. So we just click on the element. And the thing I want to show you is right here. So every HTML element has got a margin, a border, a padding, and a content. Margin is a space that surrounds the element, and border is the boundary that closes the element. Padding is a space that surrounds the actual content. And when we talked about height and width, it is the sum of border plus padding plus the content width, excluding margin. So keep this in mind as we walk through our course. We can play around with the spacing using a little tool provided in the Dev tool. So each number you see in the diagram there is in pixel. So if I double click on any one of them and I change it, notice that in the browser, the spacing will change as well. As you may have already noticed, the UL element does have a left padding of 40 pixels. Let's change that in our CSS code. We'll target nav and UL and apply a padding left property and set it to 0. The padding is no longer in the UL element. But right now I'm still not quite happy with the spacing between the list items. I would like to have more space between each of the items, so I'll just add some paddings to the left of my list items, and this will apply 20 pixels to each of the list items. Much better. Let's give our background some color. We'll target the nav element and give it a background color. You can put it to anything you want, but I'm giving it this blue color that I like. But the navbar seems to have a little margin problem here. Let's fix that. Ideally, we want the background color to fill up all the space across the navbar. Seems like the problem comes from the UL element. Let's remove the top and bottom margin. Since we don't need any margin, we can just set margin to 0, and that will apply it to margin top, bottom, left, and right. Seems like there's still a little bit of white spacing around our components. Let's investigate which element is causing that white spacing. And it seems like the body element has a default margin around it. We don't want that. Let's remove it. Again, just set the margin property to be 0 inside the body tag. And now our navbar spans from the left to the right without any spacing. So far so good. But right now the text is a little bit hard to read because our background is blue and our nav item is blue as well. Let's make it prettier. We have an A tag in each list item, so let's target the A tag and change the color to white. And I want to remove the underline by just applying text decoration to none. Looks much better. However, the nav items are way too small. Let's increase the font size to 2 rem. Now rem is a unit that's relative to the base font size. So if I say 2 rem, it means 2 times of the base font size. The base font size differs from browser to browser and also devices. It depends on the user preference in the settings of their browser. There are a few reasons on why we might want to use rem instead of pixel. Let's say we have fixed a heading at 30 pixels. If the user changed their base font size to 30 pixels as well, all the fonts becomes 30 pixels, but the headings remains at 30 pixels. So the headings has the exact same font size as the text. It's no longer really a heading anymore. So that's why we would prefer using rem instead of pixel, as it will scale according to the base font size of the user browser. Alright, let's continue. I think our navbar needs some breathing space on the top bit and the bottom bit. It seems a little bit narrow now. Let's add some paddings on the top and the bottom. And our navbar looks pretty good now. Just a side note, if you want to align the text items to the right, you can put in the text align property and set it to the right. Now, we're having a little issue here. As we keep adding our CSS code, this styles text keeps growing larger and larger. It would be great if we can put everything here inside a separate file so we don't pollute our HTML code with CSS. Let's do that. So let's create a CSS file. Let's call it style.css and just cut everything in the style tag and paste it in our CSS file. Then remove the style tags and replace it with a link tag. Make sure you select CSS and VS Code will auto-complete for you, and make sure we reference the file name correctly, and we're back in business. Next, I want to introduce you to what we call the class attribute and the ID attribute of HTML elements. The class attribute is sort of like a tag to the HTML element, and the ID attribute is a unique tag to a HTML element. So two HTML elements can share the same class name, but not the same ID. Let's take a look on how we can use classes and IDs in action. I'll start with classes. Let's say we want to give our h1 tag there, my awesome blog, some sort of styles. So what we can do is we assign a class attribute to that h1 tag and give it a value of heading. Then go to our style.css and apply cheat code number 6 to target all the heading classes and give it a font size of 3 rem. Now if we go back to our HTML and apply the same heading class to any of the article element, we can apply the same style without retargeting the article's element. Furthermore, we can apply multiple classes to one element at once. Let's create a new class called blue, and all it does is to set the color property to blue. And go back to our HTML and set this blue class to a few of our element. And there we go. So class is an incredibly useful feature when it comes to styling our HTML elements. ID works very similarly to classes. The only difference is you can have only one ID at a time. Let's give our heading an ID and call it main heading. Now we'll use cheat code number 7 to target the main heading. Put a hash symbol and type in the name of the ID. And let's underline it. And there we go. Let's remove all the classes we added just now, except for the heading. I want some spacing on the side of my content. Let's do that. I'll create a class code container. Go to the styles and set the max width to be 70%. 70% means 70% of the parent width. Now we want to centralize our content. So a way to do that is to apply margin left and margin right to be auto. Great. Next, we want to style our articles. It is a bit small at the moment and there's not enough spacing between the articles. Let's change that. Target article and give them a margin top and bottom 1.5 rem. And also a font size of 1.5 rem and line height of 1.5 rem. Next, I want to style my buttons. I don't really like the default button design in the browser. I'll target the buttons and apply background color to transparent, and I want to replace the border. Set border style to solid. This will create a simple one-line border around the button. Then I want to set the border width to 1 pixel, and of course make a font size larger, and let's apply a border color and a text color as well, and we'll use our theme color for that. I also want to add a few paddings around the button, so just set padding to 15 pixel, and now they're sitting too close together, so I'll add a margin right to 0.5 rem. But now there's an issue. When I hover over my button, my cursor does not change to the clickable state. To fix that, we'll add a cursor property to our button and set it to pointer. This will make our cursor looks like it's clickable. Now there's one more thing we want to do before we finish with our buttons. When I'm hovering on my buttons, I want the background color to be changed to somewhat a grayish blue color. To do that, we can apply what we call a pseudo class to our button. On the new block, we just do button, colon, which means on, and hover, and put our background color property. So this block simply means that when the button is on hover, I want to change the color, the background color, to this color here. And that's pretty much it. Now let's move on to our footer. It'll be very similar to how we style our navbar. So let's just copy and paste it and change the nav to footer and do a little bit of tweaks on the CSS properties. I want the footer to stick at the bottom of my screen. To do that, I'll assign its position property and set it to absolute. By doing that, the position of this element can be set explicitly by using the top, bottom, left, and right properties. So if I set bottom is to be 0, it will be 0 pixel from the bottom of the screen. We'll talk more about the display and position CSS property in a future video. And I also want to set the width to be 100% so that I can span across the bottom of the screen. I also want to change the color of the footer to make it more flavorful and change the font size a little bit and add some paddings to the top and the bottom. I'm pretty happy with how it looks now. Let's move on to the last thing before we finish the lesson. Let's add an image to our blog. Let's go to our HTML and we'll create a new div somewhere in between our headings and the articles. Let's create a div here and give it a class of div image. In there, we'll put in an image tag, hit tab to autocomplete. In the source attribute, we'll paste in an online image link. You can put in anything you want. The out attribute simply means when the image is not found, then we want to display the text as an alternative. We don't need to worry about source set for now. The image is too big. Let's put in some width and height attribute to the image tag. Then we can center the image by using the text align center property on CSS. And that's it, we're done. Key takeaway for this lesson: CSS is all about assigning styling properties to HTML. Chrome Dev2 is very useful to investigate the DOM and make quick changes for prototyping. All elements have margins, padding, width, and border. We can select elements by using CSS selectors. Class and IDs are text attributes that can be applied to all elements. That's it for now, and I'll see you again in the next lesson. If you enjoyed the content of this video, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the bell icon for more content to come. It will really help me out. Thanks for your support.